Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday for this 17th of September, 2024. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're not familiar with the format of what we do here each week at noon Eastern time, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and do a brief recap of what's happening in the news within the solar industry. Then we do a overview of some of the upcoming webinars, maybe some conferences that are going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. And then we try and go into a little bit of a deep dive into something of interest within the solar PV industry. Also, as part of this format, we have a number of folks who are also joining in live, and a lot of these folks are solar installers or people who are interested in solar. And I do invite them to jump in, interrupt, ask questions, share their experiences. So I think that makes it more interesting for me anyway. I don't really care what you think on this, so we'll go forward with that. So that said, let's jump into the news of the week for the week of September 15th. All right. Well, one of the world's largest solar and plus storage microgrids is under construction here in the heart of Appalachia, in what was formerly coal country. Powin Energy Company, a utility scale battery manufacturing company, has teamed up with BHE Renewables, and that's the renewable energy division of Berkshire Hathaway Energy. They're going to be constructing a 50 megawatt battery energy storage system in conjunction with a 106 megawatt solar array. That's going to be located to form a microgrid that'll serve this company known as Titanium Metals Corporation, which manufactures titanium products for the global aerospace industry. And all of this is taking place right near Ravenswood, West Virginia, which is a small town, about 4,000 people, located about 30 minutes or so southwest of Parkersburg, West Virginia, right along the Ohio River. This installation marks Powin's first venture into the domestic content requirements that were outlined in the Inflation Reduction Act. They're anticipating power will begin production in 2025, with the plant coming up to its full capacity in about 2027. Donald Trump pledged last Thursday that he would rescind any of the unspent funds under the Inflation Reduction Act should he be elected as president in November. He referred to the incentives incorporated in the IRA as a waste of money. And he also said that the IRA, he referred to that as the Green New Scam, eloquent as always. In 2 years under the IRA, the solar industry has added 75 gigawatts of solar capacity connected to the grid. That's about 36% of all of the solar that's been installed in the United States since the dawn of time. An analysis in April by Politico has found that of the $145 billion that was allocated within the IRA as direct funding for climate change programs as well as renewable energy, only about $60 billion of that has actually been funded out to the end recipients. So we're really looking at more than 50% of the IRA's capacity will be affected by this. In the first half of 2024, solar installations within the U.S. increased about 29% over the same time period a year ago, according to a recent report by the Solar Energy Industries Association, or CEA. The solar accounted for about 67% of all the new electric generating capacity added to the grid in the first half of 2024. Wind and battery storage accounted for the additional 27%. And fossil fuels, specifically natural gas, accounted for about only 2% of the new electric generating capacity on the grid during the first 6 months of this year. Texas was the leading state for solar installations with 5.5 gigawatts coming online, nearly twice the capacity of second-ranked Florida. And while commercial and utility scale solar were booming, actually the residential segment of the market declined during the first 6 months. This was primarily due to changes in California's net metering policy, where NEM 3.0 essentially reduced by about 75% the amount of money that the utilities would pay to residential customers when they feed their excess energy back to the grid. Since that implementation about a year ago, residential solar installations in California have declined between 57 and 85%, according to the California Solar and Storage Association. Prior to NEM 3.0, California accounted for about 1/3 of all of the residential solar installations nationwide. So, of course, this has had a knock-on effect nationwide to the reduction. And so when you add that into the mix, solar installations nationwide are declining at about 19% at the residential level over the first half of 2023. The impressive rise of U.S. solar manufacturing capacity is very likely a matter of the classic good news, bad news kind of thing. The good news is that the solar module capacity, manufacturing capacity, now exceeds 31 gigawatts. Now, this is a fourfold increase over what was available prior to the IRA passing. And much of this increased manufacturing capacity is directly related to the 10% tax credit add-on that's part of the domestic manufacturing. If you use domestically manufactured products, you get an extra 10% tax credit when you install those components. Now, the bad news for those people who wanted to develop a domestic supply chain is that a significant chunk of these are actually Chinese companies just simply setting up manufacturing facilities here in the US. These Chinese companies will have at least 20 gigawatts. Now, that's 20 gigawatts out of the 31 gigawatts that are available within a year here in the US. This is all according to Reuters. Now, the Chinese firms that are building plants are well-known names like Jinko Solar, Trina Solar, JA Solar, Longi, Boviet, Canadian Solar, which always cracks me up that that's actually a Chinese company. The Chinese-backed companies have a significant competitive advantage against those manufacturing firms from other countries. These include the fact that they have subsidized supply chains for polysilicon that come through China, as well as unfinished solar cells coming in from China. And also the Chinese government provides significant and low interest loans for these companies to get underway. And energy research firm Wood Mackenzie has forecast that of this manufacturing capacity, which is currently the announcements total up to about 112 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity in the solar marketplace, they estimate only about 52% of these will actually be constructed by the deadline or the self-imposed deadline of 2026. A number of companies that have announced that they're going to be putting in manufacturing capacity here in the US have actually now announced that's not going to happen. For example, Swiss solar panel maker Meyer Burger announced that the 2 gigawatt manufacturing capacity system that facility they were going to be installing in Colorado at an old Intel semiconductor plant is actually not going to happen. And they've cited higher interest rates as well as declining module prices that are really the result of low-cost Chinese modules coming onto the marketplace and increasingly pushing down the price. In fact, globally, the solar industry has seen a 26% drop or decline in the cost of solar modules in the last year, down to about 19 cents a watt for these, according to S&P Global Commodity Insights. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. Yeah, Pete, you've got something?
Yeah. Does anybody, do you or anyone know how frequently the net metering 3.0 in California, how frequently they settle the account? Is it weekly, monthly? Where are they at on that?
Oh, yeah. I think it is. I think it's monthly. I'm pretty sure it's allocated on your bill, so if you're feeding back in. But it used to be prior to this that you would get like full retail and I think even a little above retail for it. And then they kicked it back down to avoided cost. So now they're only paying, wholesale. What that's the knock-on effect of that has been in California a significant drop in the amount of solar installations because the economics of it are not as pleasant as they once were, but also a huge amount of solar storage, being put into these because essentially they're setting it for self-consumption. It's like if you're only going to pay me
Mhm.
4 or 5 cents, I'm not going to sell it to you. I'm just going to keep it. So you can put in batteries and then do the solar storage. So I have a feeling, California has always been the leader in solar, but it's also been a bit of a, I don't know, maybe overly subsidized. It's like they're complaining and uh, about it, but they're kind of all just falling back into the same place that the rest of us have been for a while. But California's electrical rates, as we've seen, I think we noted it last week or the week before, they're pretty high. They're 35 cents a kilowatt hour or so, where the rest of us out here in at least in the Midwest, I think Ohio's is around 18 cents. So avoided cost is a little different for me than it is for them. So
Right, right. Well, settling the account once a month provides a little cushion for the homeowners. Here in Wisconsin, Scenic Rivers squares the account once a second.
one's
So
oh,
you get once a
really?
second. So you get essentially no use out of your grid tied array unless you are at home at that moment.
I don't understand how what when you say settling the account, I was assuming
If you
when do they credit your bill? Are you
It's just the
saying
buy and sell rates are such that you're displacing your own electricity at noon, sending them some extra at noon 01, you get the 3 or 4 cents. And then 10 minutes later, when you're buying from them, you're paying 13 or 14 cents.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know that maybe this falls into line with the time of day pricing where you get variable costs depending on when you consume the electricity. And the way that it's been done in most locations is you'll have like a three-tier pricing structure
Mhm.
where it's high demand, low demand, and mid-range demand. And during periods of high demand, you might pay 25 cents a kilowatt hour, mid-range 16 cents, and low maybe 12. So we'll throw that out there. And they go under chunks of hours. Well, California is moving towards essentially a analog dial, where the pricing changes real time, depending upon the grid activity. So instead of just saying, okay, we think from 4 in the evening until 10 in the evening, that's going to be high demand, they're going to say, if it is high demand at this second, you're going to be charged high demand charges. And if it's mid, you're going to be charged that. And if it's low, you're going to be charged that. And of course, there's no way of verifying this, sort of like being a recording artist in the 1960s, and just trust me, that's how many you sold. I mean, we're all kind of depending on the utility, to be honest. And we found that they haven't warranted that trust. So I think we're going to see a bunch of people getting bills that there's no way they can verify that's what they should have been paying. That's going to be problematic. So, all right. Any other questions or comments on the news this week? All right. And feel free again to jump in as we do this. But so let's look at some of the events that are coming up here over the next couple of weeks. Fortress Power Storage Systems going to have a webinar on the 18th. I think that's tomorrow at 1 p.m. And this is through Renvu. And Renvu has a lot of nice vendor specific webinars that they put on. So their event's pretty good. Virtual power plants on 19th at 2 p.m. So if you're interested in that, third-party ownership process webinar. That's going to be on the 19th at 2 p.m. Apparently, there's a lot of things happening on the 19th at 2 p.m. because Future Grid Operations webinar coming up. And I'll mention again, I haven't mentioned this for a few weeks, but I don't really give you links or anything like that. I'm just making you aware these things exist, and you can do the Google search for it yourself. September 25th, jumped into February. At 2 p.m., digital tools for the energy transition. Then we get into the 25th at 2 p.m. This is commercial, community, and industrial solar storage issues. So CCI, if you see that, that's basically community solar, commercial, and industrial solar. Larger systems, but not quite utility scale. Then on September 26th, 2 p.m., grid interconnection tools that are out there and available. Then on the 15th, UL 3741. Now, what essentially this is dealing with systems as from the perspective of firefighter first responders. So UL 3741 is a standard that deals with hazards for firefighters primarily. And this sort of was an offshoot from the rapid shutdown activity of making sure the arrays turn off. Speaking of that, I did get an email recently from someone on the provision. If you've looked through our textbooks and the like, used to be you'd say, okay, you have to have the wires that are running under the roof line at least 10 inches below the roof line. And the concept there was that if a firefighter comes and chainsaws through the roof to vent the roof, they didn't want them hitting a live wire. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, that's been rescinded because of the rapid shutdown provisions. So the assumption is now that the wire underneath the deck is going to be not live, or at least very low voltage, because of the rapid shutdown provisions on the roof. So no longer do you have to then separate from the deck by 10 inches. So that's just interesting to know. On October 17th at 2 p.m., we have the C&I, commercial and industrial solar, how to scale up your solar install business. And then as per always, we have our online and in-person classes or hybrid classes available at solarpvtraining.com. And the new edition of Understanding Photovoltaics textbook is out and back from the publisher. So that's available. And that's it. That's the webinars that came across my desk. Anybody have anything they want to add to that mix here? Give you just a moment. All right. So what we're going to discuss here during our sort of live deep dive type thing is I want to welcome in here Paul Mullen. And Paul actually, well, Paul, if you could introduce yourself, but also he's going to give a bit of a report about what was happening at RE Plus out in Anaheim and what is, give us a sense of the trends and the like.
Yeah, so start with a quick introduction and a quick check. You can hear me okay?
I can hear you. Right? Fine. Yep.
Perfect. So just by background, I spent most of my career, I'm an electrical engineer by training. I spent most of my life in the healthcare space, working, developing mostly ultrasound devices and other medical equipment. And as I graduated from a 40-year career doing that sort of stuff, I've been still doing some consulting work in that space. In fact, my current boss is on this call, so be well behaved, I think, is the guidance for me. But since then, my wife and I have decided that we really wanted to build a very efficient home along the lines of the passive house standards. If you're not familiar with those, you can Google it, but just to put it in context, if you imagine you were building a passive home in Wisconsin, which is where I live, imagine a 5,000 square foot home that you could heat with a hairdryer. That's the level of efficiency that we're trying to reach. So we're trying to do that. It's not just solar, that's a big part of it. Also a master electrician is a part of the preparation for doing this project. I thought, well, geez, it might be good to actually have the certification so I can pull the permits and do those things. I completed that work in the last year. And I run a volunteer operated coffee shop, which is where I am today. So if any of you want a October themed drink, we will be out ahead of you. And give me a call. We'll send you a pumpkin spice latte with whiskey or rum or whatever it is you want. So that's the background. And so I come at this with a couple of biases that I wanted to just disclose up front. First, I'm a solo owner builder. I've got a residential interest here. So where you might be interested in utility scale or commercial and industrial, I'm not going to represent that point of view very well here. It was the first time I'd been to RE+. If you're wondering, RE is renewable energy, and well, I don't know what the plus is for, but I have to say, since it was my first visit, what might have been impressive for me might not be new for everybody. And so as a part of this, what Jay and I agreed is if this were a sportscast, I would be calling the play-by-play, and Jay will probably add in the color commentary as we go. And that'll be sort of the format we use here. I was really focused on products. I was not focused on policy-related things. There are lots of policy discussions going on. I just basically walked the exhibit hall and spent a lot of time talking to people. Also, just so you know,
let me jump in here, Paul, and just let everybody know, in case they're not familiar with RE+, it's pretty much one of the preeminent shows for the solar industry that happens each year. So that gives you a little bit of background, and this is where all the latest and the greatest is on display in theory.
Yeah, just from a scale perspective, this is the Anaheim Convention Center, which is a big enough convention center as it is, that it also spilled over into the adjacent Marriott Hotel and the Hilton Hotel, and all of these walkways in between had exhibit spaces. So it was one of those kind of big conferences, if you're familiar with that. There was also lots of education and leadership discussions that were happening off the exhibit hall, to which I wasn't privy. Also, because it may impact the way in which I present this, I wanted to tell you what our design objective is. This is my wife, Nancy, and I, as we stand inside of a basement, I guess. The floor trusses come in this week if you want to call us and see how that's going. Much like Jay just described, we are looking at sort of minimal use of the grid. We expect to produce on site, store on site. We don't plan to export to We Energies. There's sort of two, We Energies is our local utility, but there's sort of two things driving that. One is the retail rate versus wholesale rate discussion that Jay just mentioned a moment ago. The other thing is if you export to We Energies, then they can say an awful lot about what you install on site. They have sort of supervisory privileges. And we probably want to build a bigger system than they would normally approve for that purpose. So no export allows us to build what we want. We're looking at energy storage systems for nights and low solar insolation times. And then finally, I'm not don't really have the appetite to put together my own string inverter and a bunch of other balance of systems parts in order to build a custom system. Because we're doing a lot of other things around the home, you'll see a bit of a bias here towards a single system approach. That's not the best answer. That is an answer. It is what we are doing, and also our bias here. And again, trying to disclose the biases. We're taking the approach with SolarEdge. SolarEdge is probably the company we will work with. Two reasons for that. One is we have an existing SolarEdge installation in the home we live in now. And the second is I do very much like the DC systems and that approach to it. And I am very comfortable with the way in which those components can be put together. So I just wanted my biases to be known up front. And those of you who have a different perspective probably will want to chime in as we go. With that said, Jay, unless there's objection, let's get going.
Yep, jump on in.
All right, so get to the right place. Here we go. Solar panels. Boy, I tell you what, it's become a battle of the numbers. Here you see almost 600 watts. I think I saw a 700-watt panel. And I just included this picture over here. So you can see there's a normal human and there's the solar panel. There are some solar panels that are getting up into this range through some efficiency. And you can see 23% efficiency. That's from solar energy to electrical energy conversion. I think I saw a claim that was a little over 23, but that's sort of the maximum where the industry seems to be at the moment. So most of the way you're getting very, very large capacity panels is by making them bigger. And there's some value to that unless you're in limited space. The second thing you're seeing is a little bit on bifacial panels, which I think I talk about in a page to come up in a moment. But what you can see here is like it's specs everywhere. And I would say you occasionally will run into a company representative that really knows this stuff well. You can have an intelligent conversation with them. But for the most part, it's a race to have the biggest number.
Yeah. I always think of these things like solar panels are sort of like boom boxes in the 80s, you know.
Yeah.
Everything gets bigger and bigger while the rest of the world is getting smaller. But there is a limitation, of course, of like 50 pounds from OSHA as far as one person carrying it. And I think a lot of these bigger panels have to be targeted towards the ground mounted marketplace, because trying to get these whales up on a roof would be difficult.
Yeah, I should say on my biases, we do have enough space. We are going to do a ground mounted system. And actually choosing the format of that to take up as much space as necessary to meet our demand. By the way, if you don't know how to calculate demand, I know a guy who runs a really cool course that you can take on calculating your demand and building your system. Yeah, but choosing, do I want to go with fewer large panels or more small panels? And of course, with fewer larger panels, I can use fewer optimizers or microinverters, depending on your architecture. But on the other hand, it changes the geometry of your mounting system. So I haven't found a set of good principles on that, except for sort of empirically building it myself. So if anybody's already and really good at doing the calculus around panels size and racking efficiency, I'd be a very happy student.
I'd be curious to see if there was a decline in the bifacial. Bifacial had sort of a big, robust growth spurt there because the tariffs that were imposed on imported panels, they forgot to include bifacial panels.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
yeah,
there was a 25% bump on everybody else, but you could get the bifacial at a 25% discount. Then they reimposed that in there. So that sort of went away, but some installers got in the habit of finding, bifacials were helpful. And in case you're not familiar, bifacial essentially can absorb power from underneath as well as above, cells on both sides. So they wouldn't really work well on a rooftop mounted system, except maybe a ballasted system, but they're definitely good for ground mounted systems, especially on sand or snow fields or anywhere that you get albedo effect where you're getting light reflected up to the underside of the panel.
Amen. Yeah, in fact, I got some of those stats here. I tried to show some of these key concepts and then what I saw in terms of ranges at this meeting. Total watts, I don't think there were very many places that were under 400 watts at this point, but the trend is towards bigger stuff. Conversion efficiencies are in the high teens and low 20s. And I did a little research here. That looks like that's been growing about 10% a year over the last half decade. Temperature coefficients are getting very, very small. And for those of us who live in cold temperatures, that's a little bit of a mixed blessing because I might actually like the extra efficiency I would get in the winter, but it is what it is. Bifacial, now you have to be careful when you read these things because the bifacial panels are going to say they have 80% bifacial efficiency or 85%. All they're really saying here is the panel, the rear-facing panel, is some fraction of efficiency of the front-facing panel. But of course, what is being reflected off the ground below, whether you have white stone or sand or concrete or whatever it be, you're going to get a number much smaller than 80% additional. And that number is probably going to be in the sort of 30%-ish range. Again, that's one of those things where that 30% number, you should have a wide range of uncertainty about whatever number you used to be. And of course, size is very small to very large.
Yeah, and just as putting that as a benchmark, if you're paying more than 30% more for the panel because it's bifacial and you're getting 35 or 30% more power, that's going to be your break even. So, it doesn't make sense to go bifacial unless the cost benefit works out for you.
Absolutely, yeah. I did see a couple of things. Tesla has been the preeminent, at least from a marketing perspective, proponent of shingles on the rooftop. There were several companies. There are a few new entrants, some of them looking, especially if you had metal roofs, they had some things that looked a lot like metal roofing material. This may not be news, but it was for me anyway. CertainTeed is a manufacturer of traditional asphalt shingles. And it was the first sort of traditional asphalt shingle company that I knew of that was actually trying to insert themselves into the market. Maybe somebody on this call knows really they've been doing this for a while, but they have their own panels that essentially then connect in with their own asphalt shingle approach. I don't know whether the other companies are in this space or not, but I thought it was remarkably agile thinking of a traditional asphalt shingle company to start think about what is their role in the solar energy space. So I don't know, does anybody else know, is this new stuff or is this just the first time I had seen it?
I think GAF is also doing the same thing. I saw them at a show several years ago.
That'd be believable. Yeah. Anyway, I just think, you think about these shingling companies and you think of them sort of as the knuckle dragging producers of the stuff we've been sticking on roofs for a long time. And just really, as a guy who's been involved in technical innovation for a long time, to see them thinking in this way, I think was.
Yeah, if those who have been on these calls before know, I'm relatively biased against solar shingles, largely for the fact that the thing I always ask is, if there's innovation, great. What problem is it trying to solve? And it's typically just aesthetics. So there are better ways of dealing with aesthetics. If you have a problem with one of the elements, now you got to rip up a whole section as opposed to just replacing the one panel. They tend not to be offset as much, so you get heat issues involved there. You get wire management issues involved there. And it seems like it's a big mess just to try and solve a problem that can better be solved using other techniques. So
Amen. And I think that the same thing is going to come up when we talk about racking systems and sun tracking systems, where you can get another few percent, but is it really worth it? If you have the space, just put another panel. It's a lot less expensive way to do it. Durability. I have heard and seen some things about durability in this space, and I've got a second page on this. But I did start to see more and more people talking about hail damage. I'll show you on the next page that what folks from Jinko are doing. There is an ISO standard, an IEC standard for this, but you'll see lots of different claims around this. I did end up talking with somebody at Mission Solar for a while, who was one of the few really articulate people about what contributes both to the degradation of a panel, but also its durability. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I just included Jinko up here because it was an interesting, they have an interesting video here, which I have included.
I would probably think that the hail thing is a reaction to the increasing number of storms in Texas specifically. There's been some huge increase in insurance losses, especially for the utility scale folks and the commercial scale people. Yeah. But they're just getting panels when you get hit with one of those big hailstorms. So I could see that being marketed towards the big boys. The homeowners don't really think about it that much, but these guys, it's a big deal.
Yeah. By the way, in the earlier version of this presentation, I said, but the measurement standards are evolving. And I expected somebody on the call to say, hey, Paul, look at IEC 61215, because in that there are 19 different tests that establish the performance and durability of panels. But what's very interesting, this is from the Jinko website, what you're seeing is, well, the IEC standard talks about a 25 millimeter hail ball. They test theirs with a 50, and you're supposed to be impressed by that. But in fact, though this is a bigger ball, potentially a heavier ball, the radius of curvature is quite different. And so you would have potentially a different way of shattering glass or whatever your standard is. So, by the way, I just did this. These red color here versus black color out of the IC 61215 standard is really showing performance stuff in black and durability stuff in red. So there is a standard out there. I think it is evolving. These guys from Winneco, I used their descriptions of this because I thought they were the most clear. But clearly, you can go to 61215 and you can get what the exact same thing in the official language. In any case, the link is there if you want to find it. It's winneco.com/blog/IC612. But I just think that when you start to run out of performance standards as your differentiator, people are starting to put in durability as a potential thing. And Jay, I suspect you're right that you'd have to either be industrial scale or be a very savvy homeowner to start thinking about this. Most people are just saying, do I make money or not money when I put up solar panels? Hmm. I thought this was interesting. I have nothing to say about this company, but they had a very nice display that I thought was quite useful. So this is actually the layer stack of what's in a solar panel, at least theirs. They have the frame, the glass, and then they have something called an encapsulant. Think of this as if this were a Ziploc bag. This is the outside of the Ziploc bag. Then you have the PV panel itself, and then another encapsulant. So these two around are sort of the Ziploc bag that holds it all together, and then a backing sheet. And so I was, again, a good conversation with this guy from Mission Solar, who clearly has a point of view. But the question I was asking him is, why is it that solar panels degrade in their performance over time? Why can't I say 100% of its installation efficiency at 5 years? And his explanation, which I found quite credible, was that the layering of this set of materials is essentially a lamination process, and that lamination process is not perfect. And because it's not perfect, you get some defects in that stack, and those defects lead essentially to heat-related failures. Having then those heat-related failures don't happen across the whole panel, they happen in isolation. Because they happen in isolation, they don't necessarily degrade everything as quickly as you might expect. And so what the claims are, at least at Mission Solar as represented by this guy, was essentially we're more and more confident about the quality of our lamination process so that we do not expect these localized defects, which would then have an impact on a decrease in solar efficiency over time. And that's why we can claim these much better performances than you might otherwise expect. So maybe that's helpful. I don't know how credibly to take it, but it seemed like a guy who knew what he was talking about in an area where I as an electrical engineer, knowing what goes into the silicon, I don't expect the silicon doping to change dramatically over time. So what is it that's in fact changing the efficiency of the panel? And to his description of something mechanical in this was actually quite credible. So I offer that to you as a potential hypothesis.
Yep. I'll just also add that the better they are at laminating these things together, the harder it is to recycle. So
that's probably true.
That's something that we're going to be dealing with.
By the way, I did stop in at a couple of recycling companies. I didn't put them in this presentation. The reason is we have in our home, we have put up the latest and greatest kinds of stuff, but temporarily, we have a temporary solar installation that is not discussed here, but essentially we bought a bunch of used PV panels from some company. I don't remember who. We have them plugged into EcoFlow batteries, and we run the barn and we charge all of our, our electric tractor and gator and that kind of stuff, basically off the grid in that space. But we had them placed on the ground too close to the barn. A bunch of snow fell off the roof, and broke the panels that we had, very inexpensive, cheap rent, used panels. And we just bought some more used ones because they were very inexpensive. In the, reuse, recycle place, the reuse thing is pretty obvious. The recycling part is not quite as obvious. And Jay, I think that's really worth valuing. What I would say is for those of you who are doing your own installations, look at the used panel market, because you can get some very, very good panels at a very inexpensive price simply because they're no longer, at the state of the art.
Yeah. Also, I was going to mention that as these panels get bigger, as you're saying, nothing's less than 400 watts, that's in the new thing. Well, the distributors tend to want to get rid of their old stock. So
Yeah.
if you're not worried about the fact you're getting a 370 or a 350, and if you're putting in end-phase microinverters, it really doesn't matter because they're only going to go to say 290 anyway.
Yeah.
For output, you can pick up some pretty good deals from these folks if you're willing to take some of the older models. This is your iPhone 15 or whatever. I don't know where they're
Right.
at, but you get one, still makes phone calls,
Yeah.
So.
I'm an Android user, and I'll tell you, if you're on the iPhone, we do have medicine available for that now. I did not try to. I started to build out this slide and decided that the concept was clear with just 2 examples. I did see more and more stuff where people were combining components. Here you can see a solar panel with a microinverter all as one part, and their claim here is, if something goes wrong, you only have one person to point to, or one company to point to from a warranty perspective. I don't know. To me, it seems not that different. We're essentially mounting your microinverter on the rails underneath your panel, but that's one example, combining components. And of course, then, if you're following the new SolarEdge, and I follow SolarEdge because of my interest there, they're starting to now combine, inverter, grid tie-in, and other sort of balance of system components into a kind of a single play that's not available yet. But you'll see more and more announcements as they start to put what we might consider to be something other than an inverter and panel into a single unit. And you could have put out 3 or 4 more examples on this page, but simply combining components was an interesting theme. I'm a bit suspicious of it from those on this call who might be trying to build best of breed systems that, have the best panel, the best inverter, the best, et cetera, et cetera. It's harder to do with these kinds of things. But for those looking for speed of installation or efficiency of installation, it's a pretty interesting concept.
Yeah, I tend to like the modular approach, because if one thing goes bad, you don't want to have to replace them all. And this feels like a planned obsolescence kind of move where all of a sudden you got to send the whole unit back, and it just, like you said, it's not that hard to bolt a microinverter to a panel or to a rail. It's not
this doesn't save much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. However, and by the way, I'll have more to say that in a slide coming up. A lot of stuff I hadn't seen before in non-traditional placements, and by this I mean not on a home, not on a building. There were a number of displays about RVs, and here I don't know that it's easy to see in this case. Maybe a little bit easier to see in another slide. Yeah, I'll show it on another slide here. Go back here. RVs, boats. This is a floating dock with panels on it, and then several different systems that you could deploy for emergency power, even in a number of people talking about humanitarian rescue kinds of situations. I really didn't understand this company that had this massive towable trailer, which did not appear to me to provide a whole lot more power than just, fold up an array and slap it out there with an inverter. So not quite sure what they were thinking here, but nevertheless, a lot of work on non-traditional placements. You can kind of see, I've got the movie playing here. This was a particular company that was doing awnings that roll out or slide out. And you can kind of see it working there. There's a number of these kinds of things out there. By the way, my good friend Greg Ballinger is on this call. He's interested in doing this stuff on boats. So if you are interested in deployment of solar energy on boats or in boatyards, you might want to talk with Greg. But nevertheless, you can see, these flexible, I'd say cloth-like. They're still pretty heavy. Maybe it's more canvas type. There's also a few companies that are looking at not necessarily rollable, but quite flexible panels that could be put into a variety of applications. Some of the people here were really interested in this being a lighter weight solution than a normal framed panel. And then finally, there were a few places starting to show some embedded stuff. This is a Hyundai windshield that's got some embedded PV in it. But that was kind of the theme there is how else can we mount these things? Jay, anything you want to comment on there?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of rollout, the solar fabric thing, there have been some innovations like canopies for farmers market tents, things like that.
Yeah.
And for a while there was a neat, I've got a video one I play in class where it's like an emergency responder trailer where you haul it out there. It's got all of the batteries, all of the other things, and then you just take it and stake the solar panels into the ground and drive off, and it unrolls this huge array behind the trailer as you're moving across a field. So the installation happens in just a couple of minutes, and you get a very large. It's sort of one like the trailer you were just pointing to, only a little more efficient, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I think one of the problems with some of these deployable systems is, it's hard to deploy enough area to charge the system in a reasonable amount of time. But, if you're in a boatyard and you can have, you're not on your boat every day, but you want to charge it while you're at the pier, this provides a reasonable option. I also have seen some stuff, largely out of Germany, where they have these things, they mount them on the railings of apartment buildings, essentially, with a microinverter already built into it. You just plug it into the wall and you can recharge your house pretty slow, but at least it's non-zero. And I think innovation in this space, I think, will continue as we go. Mm-hmm. Energy storage. Wow. If there weren't enough panels in the building, I can tell you there were more than enough energy storage systems. And everywhere you turn, obviously there are a lot of people trying to move away from traditional lithium batteries. Lithium iron phosphate is an interesting one. There's some people looking at sodium batteries. I think a lot of that is pretty early days, but the thing that was clearly true is that most places that I visited were looking at stackable systems so that you're not putting in one giant Tesla, they call them power wall, but you would put them in as sort of stackable modules with two design intents here. One design intent was simply that it becomes modular and you can decide how much storage you need without overbuying or underbuying. But the other was installation, because those very large batteries often require at least a two-man crew. And here you could do it, a single installer could do it. I've zoomed up a little bit on this little module that you see right here. And what you see is they have a connector that would connect the module below to the module above, and then they just have handles to lift it into place. Not all of them did it exactly this way, but this idea of modular storage coming largely from the ability to just stack them one on top of another.
So you're making you're making a parallel connection when you just lay it down to okay.
Exactly.
And did you see any solid state batteries there?
I'm sure they were there. I did not see any, but I looked for them.
And was your impression that these things are things that are commercially available, or was this a lot of vaporware?
At least some of them are available. I wouldn't say, I don't know whether N-Block or whatever company this is. I don't know that they're all available. I know for sure, because I have a friend who works for EcoFlow, that their modular system is available. And but now EcoFlow, Jackery, and Anchor are all in sort of that portable power space, roll in a battery stack. And They do have these sort of modular stackable systems, and they are technically available, or not technically, they're commercially available. I guess they're technically available too. I can't say that all of these larger systems are necessarily available, at least some of them.
Okay. I'll also give you a heads up. We've got about 5 minutes and then we'll.
Okay, we're going to go fast here. Load shedding, big story here. It's now table stakes. Leviton, Span, Schneider, all looking at the load shedding question. There's new stuff coming out from Span. I think finally, a little bit larger panel. They're going to do some smaller ones. They fix some of this, electricians fix some of the issues they had around installation. You can install it upside down now and a few other things. And they've also realized that the smarts in this are going to require a replaceable engine. And so now it's just a plug-in. Leviton's doing something similar. Schneider, I thought, had a much more credible display this year than I've seen at some other meetings. And again, there's a lot more stuff going on in the balance of system space in terms of load shedding. This one, all of you who studied well under Jay should now all of a sudden retake the course. So the issue that we have had here around the 80% rule on the bus bar still is the rule, but in fact, what SolarEdge is starting to do, and I imagine others, is they're actually putting current loop transformers on the legs of the breaker panel and measuring the actual current on the bus bar, and then shedding loads as necessary to stay under the rating of the bus bar. And so instead of derating your system to ensure that you never end up with too much current on the bus bar, you in fact rate it where you can all go all the way up to the rating of the system, but then you can start to shed loads when you get close to the rating of the bus bar. Very interesting approach. We can debate that after some time, but I thought it was the first time I had seen somebody try to deal with the load side of this rather than just derating your panel. Racking systems everywhere. By the way, I've seen a ton of them. If you haven't used this Iron Ridge Design Assistant to build racking systems, it's the only one I know of that's out there. I asked a bunch of other companies about it. Still, nobody's doing it quite like Iron Ridge is. For me, I love that. It biases me a bit towards Iron Ridge because then I can iterate my design a bunch of times without calling and recalling somebody as I want to do design updates to my racking design. So I thought that was quite interesting. Bidirectional charging everywhere. I don't know how many of these are real. For sure, this one is not available. For sure, the Schneider one is not yet available. I'm not sure about Mars Tech, but this page could have had hundreds of them in there. I think some of them are real or some of them aren't. But the question is, well, how many cars actually support this? And I thought it was a pretty small number. And then I did a little research. And in fact, there are actually quite a few cars out there that claim to be bidirectionally capable. I think the challenge here is simply what are the charging standards and how does it all fit together? Jay, you said some very articulate things a moment ago when we were talking yesterday on this topic. Anything you want to add here?
Yeah, the bidirectional charging thing is definitely looming out there, but it does have to be standardized as to the protocols that they use. I see just an example, the Ford F-150, definitely bidirectional, but it has its own proprietary system. Probably some of the other ones there do as well. I know that the Nissan Leaf, if I recall, was like the only car, at least up until recently, and that may have changed, that said, we're willing to work with anybody. It's like, this can avoid your warranty, that kind of thing. So these are all things that have to be worked out before this becomes super practical.
Just a couple of other topics. There's a bunch of these. I thought this was just interesting for those of you who are thinking about industrial scale. This is my one industrial scale thing, but lots of people think about panel cleaning. I don't know how much improved performance you get if you have robots clean your panels, but that was cool.
Yeah.
Beyond solar, there was not much. There were 2 registered wind producers. I visited one of them. I couldn't find the other. Here's the challenge here. I think, by the way, I really like the design here. I think it's beautiful. It's a really cool idea. They've got different modules, another smart company. But, 123 watts per hour in my neighborhood. By the way, you can go to a website and figure out what your typical wind load is. And then, this was mine. So in my area, I'd get about 123 watts an hour for a $10,000 turbine. I'm thinking, well, let me just add some panels. Carryable storage, I mentioned that a moment ago, a few different companies you can look at, and this keeps moving along. These companies are also producing things like solar refrigerators and other solar appliances, so you can watch that. I think this is a battle of, this is sort of battle of the mice in the land of the elephants, but it's a very interesting development here. By the way, we own a couple of these. I think I own an anchor system and I own a EcoFlow system. So they both work and they're good for what they are. I have run a concrete mixer off of my EcoFlow system. I've run other things off of my anchor system. So you can do an awful lot with these guys. Be aware when you purchase these that they don't handle big spikes in inrush current. So just make sure you're paying attention to that if inrush current is important to you. These guys are set up such that their inrush current is usually pretty close to their peak power. Then the last thing I would tell you is marketing was everywhere. I don't know how exactly you pronounce the name of this company, but it was an example of the way in which if you're trying to enter the North American market, you might want to talk to a North American on the way. And that's it, Jane. That's my update.
All right. Well, I appreciate your filling us in there. We've got time for maybe one 30-second question, and then we'll have to call it a day. Anybody have any question there that was burning in their mind?
Jay, Devananya.
Yeah.
Right now, currently working on a 5 megawatt floating solar project in Trinidad and Tobago. Did you see a lot of products there from vendors with the solutions, basically in floating solar?
Yeah, for sure. Those people were there at the meeting. I just didn't visit them because it wasn't. I had a one-day pass, so I didn't have enough time truly to go through, and so I focused on residential. But there was that kind of scale stuff everywhere, and trailer-sized storage and inverters, trailer-sized cooling systems in many cases. For sure, it exists there. It wasn't my focus.
Okay, no problem. Okay.
Anything else real quick? All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate your update, and we'll call it a day, and we'll see you guys all next week. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.